Um, I forgot. Yes, thank you. And this is our second seminar. We are featuring wonderful scholars who have conducted a series of formative interventions called learning labs for Enacted Utopias. They are going to share their experience, their work in different cultural, historical, and spatial contexts, generating knowledge for systemic transformation with local stakeholders, with local communities. Nationally, we are here represented by three groups of communities. First one is the Anishinaabe Nation, and the second one is United States. We have two sides from the United States, from New Hampshire, state of New Hampshire, and the state of Kansas. And lastly, we have a learning lab from state of Rio. Today we are going to start with Dosun Ko. Dr. Ko will present the learning lab methodology. And then Fabiana Bravo, Dr. Bravo will share her work in Brazil, the oldest special education institute in South America. And Tosun Ko will present his work in Kansas public school. And then Linda Ori will talk about a longitudinal learning lab, a long-term collaboration between her research team and the Anishinaabe Nation, and a local school district serving the Anishinaabe Nation. And last but not least, Diane Mavene will talk about her learning lab in the district level in the state of New Hampshire, where communities got together to design new activities and artifacts to address racial disparities in bullying and negative social context in the school district. We are going to save 30 minutes for the discussions. We would love to hear from you, your reflections, your ideas, your utopias as well. So we are going to have an interactive session. Mike, before we start, would you like to say anything? You are muted, Mike.
Short version is no. I think that was a fine introduction. I'm looking forward to listening to the talk today.
Definitely, definitely. So through this presentations, through this seminar, today's seminar, we are moving into this materialized form of utopias and the negotiations, orchestrations, innovation, ingenuity, and struggles coming with these utopia-making, future-making efforts. It's going to be a very fruitful conversation. Again, recordings of this session will be featured on Cultural Praxis. Cultural Praxis is a platform it's a sister platform of Mind, Culture, and Activity. So Editorial Collective of Mind, Culture, and Activity are also leading this wonderful site. I highly recommend you to take a look at the site. Besides our seminar, there are wonderful talks, publications, and the opportunities for the exchange ideas on variety of subjects related to cultural historical activity theory. Again, these the recording of this session and the following Futures of Education seminar sessions will be available on Cultural Praxis website. Also, we are going to invite the Futures of Education seminar panelists to provide short essays on their work, either theoretical, empirical work. So please look for this special issue called the Futures of Education for the recordings of our seminar series and also essays accompanying this series. Let's start our first presentation. Dr. Ko.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you so much for having me on this wonderful the seminar. Before introducing our individual work using Learning Lab, we'd like to start giving some theoretical background of Learning Lab methodology. By the way, can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
So Learning Lab is informed by formative intervention methodology. Learning Lab was developed particularly in order to address educational inequities resulting from the historical legacies of settler colonialism, racism, white supremacy, and anti-blackness, as well as promote social transformation. As a praxis-oriented systemic design intervention that facilitates a dialectical interplay between problem identification and problem solving. Learning labs, have been implemented to design more utopian versions of schooling through building reciprocal school, family, community, as well as university partnerships. Learning Lab is an inclusive problem-solving space where educational professionals, families, students, as well as community members work together to collectively interrogate daily problems of practice and collaboratively design locally meaningful solutions for systemic transformation. Particularly, Learning Lab aims to serve as a future-making artifact, the theory artifact, to empower and validate local stakeholders' histories of resistance, cultural assets, as well as political future imaginations to design a new transformative system. As a formative intervention methodology, Learning Lab participants follow a cycle of expensive learning actions. Notably, Learning Lab seeks to promote and leverage local stakeholders' collective and transformative agency to bring about qualitative changes in the current systems. Now, we will briefly introduce how each study utilized the Learning Lab methodology to develop their locally meaningful solutions to their problems of practice. Let me turn it over to Dr. Bravo first.
Dr. Bravo, you are muted.
I'm going to share the screen. So, can you view that? Okay. So before I start talking about the study itself, I will contextualize the study with a historical background. So the setting of the study is Instituto Benjamin Constant. You say IBC, it is short, IBC, Instituto Benjamin Constant, and it was founded in 1854, and it's considered a pioneer in the education of the blind in Brazil and Latin America. And there is a counterpart of the institution called the National Institute for Young Blind People, located in Paris, France. And IBC was first envisioned by a young Brazilian blind man who was sent to study at this institute in Paris in 1843 and brought ideas to develop a similar institution here. So initially the institute, I have a picture here. Okay, so initially the institute was a school for blind boys, and only blind boys could study there. And though the institute was born as the school for the blind, throughout history, it has responded to cultural and social changes by expanding the institute. So now the institute started as a school and it expanded in different departments. So now we have the Department of Education, Department of Rehabilitation, Department of Specialized Materials, Department of Research, and Graduate Studies. So historically, throughout its history, the Department of Education, mostly the Department of Education, has observed changes in practices to address first the needs of students with low vision, and now most recently students with visual impairment and additional disabilities such as autism, intellectual disability, and cerebral palsy. So it is this last group, students with visual impairment and additional disabilities, that triggered, and I must say now from my recent practice at the Institute, it is continuously triggering disturbances in the activity system of the Institute. So the following slides are meant to show how artifacts evolved historically within the Institute. So on the top, on my left, you can see a tool used to teach math from the 30s and 70s. So nowadays we use abacus. At the bottom on my left, you can see wooden drawers with engraved with maps engraved in metal. And nowadays we use thermoform. It's like a plastic that we heat, and then we can on the top of a texturized model, and then we make maps to teach geography and other teach about science, how the heart works, for instance. And this next slide we have on the top, on my left, slate and styles. It's used by all teachers to teach the Braille system. And at the bottom, we have a computer with screen readers to teach a computer class. And it has contrast for our students with low vision. Sometimes we use contrast, colors, contrasting. And this last artifact that I chose, it shows how we now are developing new artifacts, new tools to address the needs of students with additional disabilities. So this one, for instance, it was developed to develop fine motor skills and numbers. So we can say that the historical movement, this historical movement encompassed in the evolving artifacts, is very representative of how the specialized school represents a dilemmatic space where the object of the activity rests on multiple contested and interrelated historical layers and perspectives. The here and now of everyday practices is linked to an evolving history of special education bounded by the economic, political, and cultural context of the Brazilian society. Okay, just so we have like I kind of try to show this past and the present. So we have a list of enrolled students from 1855, and now we have students presenting dance and music from the early childhood education. So so what I can see from this historical dilemmatic space is that on the same day, and this has happened to me, we can you can be exposed to professionals with a religious view of disability, and then another one has a social model of disability, another one can support medical model of disability. So we have these different views stemming and triggering disturbances in the activity system of the school. So in this ground, with multiple competing historical layers, in the context of an inclusive education agenda, emerges the tensions depicted with the support of the activity system model. So we have a group of teachers who were used to work within a specific system. And now as students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, additional disabilities, enter the system, it creates a mess. And it's almost impossible now to work without doing boundary crossing. Like we need to do boundary crossing. We need to talk to other professionals, speech therapists. So if you don't do that, if you don't move, we don't learn. And practitioners have this very clear-cut division of labor, where general teachers, subject teachers, each one occupying their space. And they use specific mediating tools with a specific community following specific rules. And all this has been and still is being challenged, this very clear-cut division of labor, community of practice. But before I move on to the Learning Lab formative intervention, I need to address the decolonizing inclusive education, the meaning of decolonizing inclusive education. So when a group, so decolonizing inclusive education is a process of a local knowledge production that draw on the strengths and capabilities of local communities and challenges dominant Western ways of seeing. So it is therefore essential to acknowledge the need to reconstruct and revision inclusive education in developing countries by recognizing the need for a locally situated inclusive education approach that draws on the strengths of local communities while making informed decisions based on conceptualizations of inclusive education from developed countries. So thus, to ask whether inclusive education is right or wrong, whether it works or does not work, is, we suggest, to miss the point. To place oneself for or against inclusive education, for or against special schools. Inclusive education or special education means to dwell in the superficiality of the debate, and that does not help to understand the complexity of the rights of people with disabilities that encompasses public health, sanitation, and leisure. So when a group of professionals from IBC formed the Learning Lab, the goal was to identify the challenges in the process of the inclusion of this specific group of students and how to address them through problem solving. And in the process, they inevitably also address the meaning of inclusive education in the specialized school within an agenda of inclusive education. And the Learning Lab, as Sanino says, it was a moment of experiencing contradictions, voicing tensions, and working through it while listening to ourselves and listening to others in the process. And because this the Learning Lab in Brazil happened during COVID pandemic, it was a virtual learning lab, and we used some specific tools in the mediating the process. Oh my gosh. Okay, so these were so we use breakout rooms, we use the whiteboard, shared screens, and the liaison members, they were the co-hosts. Because when we had the breakout rooms, I could not be in both places. So the liaison members, they helped me during the activities, the proposed activities. Oh, I forgot, I skipped this one. So 14, how many teachers took part in the Brazilian Learning Lab? 14 teachers from different grade levels engaged in 9 meetings with the final goal of producing a new system of inclusive education for students with additional vision impairment and additional disabilities during COVID-19 pandemic. Most of the participants had been working between 7 to 10 years at the institution and had at least a master's degree in their areas. Teachers also had additional training in some courses from the expanded core curriculum, such as Braille, low vision, audio, description, independent reading skills, and assistive technology. And I could identify among participants powerful enablers who show great commitment and effort to make changes and generate opportunities to promote education for all. One of the participants said, and she used this word battling, that is very strong word, for the enrollment of children with additional disabilities at the early childhood level since the 2000s. I'm sorry. As the former head of the early intervention program. Margarida, is a pseudonym, insisted that the children with intellectual and developmental disabilities could not be sent at the end of the program, not be sent home. So we follow the cycle of expensive learning. The different steps, we follow the stepwise cycle of extensive learning across the virtual meetings, which stimulate teachers into the process of experiencing, remediating, and expanding their practice. So for this presentation, I'm sorry, before. So we moved across the 9 meetings to complete the full cycle. And each cycle, in each stage of the cycle, there was a first stimuli, triggering the contradictions and supporting the second stimuli. When the participants, they sought from external tools, from their own discussion, support to solve that problem stimulated by the first stimuli, triggered by the first stimuli. So from this presentation today, I choose to zoom in into the mapping out. The mapping out methodology happens during the analyzing phase. This was a very powerful moment for me doing the methodology, because it's when the teachers, they make their own environment stranger to them. So they started in different breakout rooms. They started following questions. They started analyzing their own activity system. And there were a lot of surprises during this phase, because, for instance, the IP, the individualized educational plan, some teachers, they used the IP, others didn't even know that the IP existed in their practice. So there was this moment of surprises and revisiting or getting to know their activity system, their practice from a different point of view. So mapping out action mediated by tools from their virtual environment stimulated agency ownership, because they were able to produce, to visualize their activity system, and then from this map of inclusion that they elaborated, they were able to observe the possibilities and the constraints in their own activity system, in their own practice. So organized into the...
I apologize, Dr. Bravo. I'm so sorry for cutting off. Can you use last 2 minutes to wrap up the presentation, please? I know it's a lot of, but again, we are going to have a chance to read your essay. So if you can just wrap up in 2 minutes, that will be lovely. Thank you.
So they were organized in breakout rooms, each one with a liaison member, and the teachers, they map out their own activity system with rules, roles, tools. They were guided by questions. And what a strong phrase, a strong that came out from the mapping out was this one. One of the participants said that the school looks like a quilt with different spaces, with different news, different organizations, and different practices. So the mapping out brought this possibility of seeing the activity system, their practice from a distance, and they could see, wow, how this organization, this institute is so big. This looks like a quilt. Yeah, how challenging it is to even to do this boundary crossing and talk with our peers and exchange ideas during our practice. So these are the possibilities and constraints that came out of the mapping out. The possibilities or the team of special educators. The IP was both a possibility and a constraint because there was lack of the IP within the same practice, within the same system. We were able to, so we expanded the object of activity encompassed teachers, families, and students. The members of the Learning Lab agreed that we were in need of an integrative project to integrate families, integrate the different professionals in the activity system, because we came from a very fragmented setting, from a very fragmented activity system. There was this need to integrate. But I must say that unfortunately, similar to a work that a Brazilian work that I read from Sensi, there were lots of there are obstacles for the implementation. Teachers, they were able to envision the future. One of the teachers said that this space gave us opportunity to discuss our practice in the classroom and understand the institution as a whole, facing an inclusive perspective. We were working, trying to make meaning of the needs of students with multiple disabilities. And what was missing was this collaborative, collective, creative path towards institutionalization. So they were clear about the path that we need to take. They created this vision for the future. But unfortunately, we had obstacles into institutionalizing this vision for the future. We, similar to Sensi, but it's another Brazilian practitioner who also she implemented a formative intervention, but she also had challenges implementing, and we also had this challenge because of external and internal obstacles. It's political issues, internal and external, and lack of resources. We are now shortage of teachers. So it is, though teachers, they did have agency, they did have this awareness of where to go, we really lack this support into implementing. So what are we doing now? Because I didn't lose hope. Now we are working, I'm not expanding, like I'm working into small space. I'm working together with parents and teachers, smaller, with Learning Lab. In a literacy project, we are asking ourselves, how can parents support literacy through tactile illustrated storybooks? And we are in the process, and we hope to value parents on voices, on contributions, and develop a collaborative process for developing tactile illustrated storybooks and ways of mediating storytelling. It took me some time to acknowledge it was kind of frustrating not to be able to implement the project as we wanted. And sometimes you need to go back and then come back with new possibilities. And unfortunately, we have this really strong politics. Sometimes some things is beyond our strength.
Thank you, Dr.
But it was a very powerful experience. Thank you
so much for sharing this wonderful experience with us. I really appreciate for this wonderful presentation. Now we are taking a flight from Rio to Kansas. Dr. Ko, would you be able to share your experiment with Learning Lab in Kansas Public School?
Yeah, okay. So now I will introduce an equity-oriented systemic design, which was enacted at an urban middle school in a Midwest state, Kansas. In the following slides, I will shed light on the urban school community's collective future-making endeavor. before illustrating a concrete case of how Learning Lab organized a inclusive problem-solving space for local stakeholders, I would like to elaborate on the conceptual foundation of this project. So first of all, in order to dismantle and humanize the stratifying structure of the current schooling, educational scholars, practitioners, and activists have collectively sought an emancipatory agenda, which reimagine schools as a fugitive space. Fugitive literally means breaking away from, normalized and taken for granted practices, tools, and identities. The concept Learning as a fugitive actions centers on unpacking oppressive systems of schooling and reshaping the systems to attain racial equity and disability justice. So before introducing my concrete case of how I organized a fugitive learning space for local stakeholders, I would like to elaborate on two critical considerations in designing locally meaningful solutions in a specific historical, social, and spatial context. Research on racial disproportionality in disability identification and school discipline has often adopted ahistorical and decontextualized lenses with mainly quantitative approaches. However, those approaches tended to mathematize the complex social problems, and the quantitative works often give less attention to the historical entanglement of race and disability, power and privilege, as well as intersectional identities, beyond the question of whether racial minority students are over or underrepresented in special education and school discipline. So there has been insufficient emphasis on using historical and spatial epistemology to assess how historically sedimented and ongoing racism and ableism constitute detrimental social geographies that perpetuate racialized opportunity and outcome disparities in education. The absence of nuanced temporal and spatial analysis of systemic racism's impact on students' lives contributes to race-neutral disability diagnosis or reactionary administrative responses in school discipline, and consequently consolidate an oppressive school system, which is entrenched in toxic racial ideologies. Given the complexity of disproportionality pattern, addressing disproportionality demands situated solutions. In order to develop locally meaningful solutions, it's critical to prioritize the perspectives and voices of local stakeholders as key agents in developing situated solutions, particularly in order to empower local stakeholders as legitimate knowledge producers and decision makers. Is crucial for disrupting a racialized power structure in the school participation and decision-making process, and amplify historically dismissed voices as counter narratives. Let me briefly explain the context of this project. James Baldwin Middle School is located in a metropolitan urban area in Kansas. The urban landscape of the city of Sunflower reveals a different urban geography of opportunity along the color line through discriminatory housing policies, economic segregation, and education. The city has a deep historical root of urban segregation. First, harmful housing policies such as redlining demarcated the residential boundaries of Black communities. After the residential boundaries were resolved by the city's effort to promote racial integration across or within schools, Black families finally began moving to white spaces to seek better life opportunities. The residential desegregation in urban districts, however, resulted in massive white flight to new suburbs. A vicious chain of white exodus and its subsequent economic and educational disinvestment brought about high poverty and segregated spaces in the city. Even if the U.S. Supreme Court's landmark civil rights ruling, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, mandated desegregation in schools, the city's Board of Education refused the Supreme Court's decision. Particularly, white parents' resistance and resentment to integrating Black students instigated the board's refusal of racial integration. After the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education carried out a punitive sanction that discontinued federal funds, the school district implemented a voluntary desegregation plan by busing. Cross-town busing forced families of color to exclusively endure repercussions of a radical transition to white space, having a relatively inadequate infrastructure to meet the unique needs of students of color. James Baldwin Middle School is no exception to the city's historical legacy of residential segregation. This school historically served from the affluent white communities. However, altering school attendance zone, busing, and school choice policy accelerated the influx of students of color from the most impoverished communities in the city. Despite representing about 15% of the student population, Black students were conspicuously overrepresented in exclusionary school discipline. As a new leader, the building principal brought new innovations to the school to address racialized outcome disparities in school discipline. His leadership team developed a school-wide tiered behavior support system, introduced restorative justice practice, and offered anti-bias training for school personnel to reduce disproportionality. However, a single individualistic focused solution without systemic change had a limited impact on addressing disproportionality. So the principal decided to participate in this Learning Lab project. So this table presents the purpose of Learning Lab sessions, which are purposefully designed to help lab members experience the expensive learning, a cycle of expensive learning actions. Expensive learning actions start with forming an inclusive problem-solving team and address the question of who can design possible futures and how to fulfill epistemic justice. In a scripted participation structure, family of color often experience marginalization in school decision-making, even though school policies and practices profoundly impact their children's lives and learning opportunities. Learning Lab sought to amplify historically marginalized voices to fulfill representational justice. 9 stakeholders participate in these Kansas Learning Lab sessions. So I would like to simplify the expensive learning actions given time constraints. So the questioning process has 2 purposes. First, developing a situated understanding of local context of inequity. Second, criticizing taken for granted policies, tools, and practices. Questioning process is very important because in order to prevent developing technical and race-neutral solutions that further marginalize students from non-dominant communities, race-neutral solution can be used as the ideological armor for a covert and institutionalized system. So in order to develop race-conscious solutions and attend to race privilege and power in shaping outcome disparities, the research team mobilized multiple mediating artifacts through which Learning Lab members developed intersectional, historical, and spatial epistemologies. For example, the school's academic behavior outcome data were disaggregated by race, gender, disability status, and other forms of social markers to facilitate members' intersectional understanding of how different social markers interdependently shape a student's learning opportunities. The research team also used news articles and a documentary that covered the historical legacy of the city's residential segregation and busing policy to foster members' historical understanding of the local context of inequity. Also, a school attendance zone map, interactive GIS maps also are employed to collectively examine how life opportunities are spatially distributed. These artifacts actually help the members situate the racialized outcome disparities within a deep-rooted historical and spatial local context of inequities. Then, after developing historical and spatial and intersectional epistemologies, Learning Lab members collectively analyze the systemic challenges which are deeply entrenched in the current school system with these guiding questions. Once again, in the modeling stage, the members collectively envisioned fugitive solutions to address systemic challenges identified through a collective analysis into system. Once again, in order to avoid just developing or replicating technical and race-neutral solutions, the research team intentionally developed and utilized equity-oriented design tools that are informed by the cross-pollination of culturally sustaining pedagogy and universal design for learning. Culturally sustaining pedagogy is an asset-based pedagogical framework that leverages diverse students' everyday experiential knowledge. It also honors students of color's intersectional identities and tap into their ever-changing cultural and linguistic assets as transformative sources of transformative teaching and learning. UDL is an inclusive framework to ensure access to learning opportunities by removing barriers. UDL aims to expand our students' engagement and motivation by aligning contents with learners' perspectives and everyday experiences. These equity-oriented questions and reflective prompts functioned as a scaffolding for Learning Lab members' collective future making to design fugitive solutions to dismantle the oppressive system. So lab members envisioned multiple solutions in response to their local politicized context. This figure presents newly designed systemic solutions in response to the school community's goals, needs, and available resources. In conclusion, Learning Lab methodology can be a fugitive tool through which local stakeholders can build a mutual alliance as well as exercise their transformative agency to design adaptive solutions in response to their specific social, cultural, and political context, as well as their future imaginations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. I really appreciate your wonderful presentation. I know you have a lot of things to say about this work, but hopefully during the discussion, you're going to have a chance to share the actual implementation of the new system. Now we are moving into Anishinaabe Nation, another state, Anishinaabe Nation, and Linda Ori will present their work they conducted in Learning Lab in collaboration with the Anishinaabe Nation. Linda?
Hey, hello everyone. I'm honored to present Indigenous Learning Lab with you all today. I'm a graduate student in curriculum instruction. So this is ILL in its fifth year, where we're not in the active learning lab at this moment anymore. It's more of a supportive sustainability role at this point, but we have a lot of partners here. And so on behalf of my colleagues, I'm presenting here as a single person, but this is a huge team effort. So I just wanted to acknowledge and invite anyone in. Dr. Ball, Aaron Birdbear is on the call here too, as well, the PIs that led us through this project and are still supporting us. And then of course, Dosen and Dion and Jahan, others from the team directly. So feel free to chime in, but it's definitely a wonderful team effort. So in the first year, we had 14 diverse mix of stakeholders from the school and the local community. I should add too that this is the first learning lab in Indian country, I believe, or the first one with a tribal nation. So I'm very proud to represent this teaming with one of the Anishinaabe nations of the state. And then the latter team went down to about 10 folks, including school personnel, but also folks from the Ojibwe, the local community. And then on the university side of things, attending professor Aaron was the inaugural tribal relations director, and then some graduate students, of course. So the historical context really became obviously central here with any formative intervention project. Obviously the history is going to be giving you a ton of clues onto not just how things got to where they are, but of course, where the solutions might lie to paths out of these dysfunctions, right, and these tensions and contradictions that students keep continually facing in the settler colonial school system, right? So there's a picture of a boarding school in the area. Still standing now. It's part of the nation's historical preservation office. So they turned into basically a museum of showcasing, that this asset's still here, but it's used and now owned by the tribe instead of it being a assimilatory thing. It's used to kind of reclaim. And it's amazing that this building's still standing, actually. So over here you see some propaganda from the Walleye warriors. So of course the Northwoods was this epicenter of anti-Indian protesting and hatred, anti-treaty rights in the late 80s, early 90s. And also sometimes this still pops up. This still just happens. A couple of years ago, there was another shooting where tribal members are simply exercising treaty rights and fishing, and then someone's shooting at them. Obviously they're, still these flare-ups that happen, but this is all from systemic uprisings between the white conservative folks of the area and the Native Nation. This is in northern Wisconsin, so particularly Anishinaabe bands, just exercising their treaty rights. So in the school, of course, this discipline is racialized, right? We have these persistent patterns of disproportionality among the white versus the Native students in the school. So you see data here from a few years, and that the percent white population is roughly around 80%, give or take a couple of percentage points, but the Native population is making up the other portion of the school. But if you look at the discipline rates, how much are suspended are Native students, 60% versus 50%. So more than double, right? Their rates of the population. So these longstanding patterns exist, right? And so approaching these with disaggregating the data, right, by race is a first way to combat these, getting behind that first, that veil of aggregation that may mask, what's truly happening, these deep systemic issues that the data are living out. So basically, we're looking at Indigenous Learning Lab centering the lived expertise of a multitude of stakeholders, right? Folks in the field, people at the school, people at the university, parents, elders, an advisory council even. So folks in very different walks of life and different institutions coming together to center systemic change where the Indigenous folks are leading the way. So just really, there's a lot kind of happening here, but we're really privileged to work with the tribal liaisons throughout the project, and also a lot of work that had been done prior to Indigenous Learning Lab's beginnings. So even though this is a large rural high school, public high school, there were a lot of efforts between the high school's past administrators and the local nation to build better relationships. For example, they were gifted an Eagle staff, and that's probably displayed in the school's building, this They hold powwows there, you know, for the entire school community, which is in a public school, it's pretty remarkable. So they've been doing various things, various outreach efforts to get more Native folks in the building and more parent involvement. So building on a lot of the efforts to it. I can't play that up enough, how important that was that we built on this. So moving from the assimilation, right, of cultural erasure, we're now, oh yes, we're having powwows in the building, right? Now we're talking about ways of integrating Native American literature and art, right? Classes that offer through Act 31 tribal classes about tribal sovereignty and exercise of treaty rights, Indigenous language and culture classes taught by tribal members most often, hopefully. And then moving from this reactive discipline to restorative behavioral interventions and positive behavioral supports, where it's seen as a systemic root and also a solution, right, to getting more folks at the table to investigate these problems that keep happening. A lot of times it's the principal only investigating one aspect, but working with the tribal mentors, working with families and community members, and really addressing these deep root causes. And also being present more in the community. So these are some things that came up throughout the project, and overall changing this deficit-based understanding into an asset-based one, realizing how much, you know, trauma and how many challenges exist in the present day. So one really remarkable, wonderful thing that may seem small was actually really transformative is starting every meeting we did with good words and smudging, led by one of our leaders here from the tribal community, and also a Indian mentor in the building. For a few years. So the pipe ceremony, he brought his bundle, saying some great words in Ojibwe just to start us off in a good way together. And then of course, smudging, bringing some sage and remarking about how great it was to be able to smudge in the library, right? In the school, even in the principal's office, where he thought he would never be able to do such a thing as a student in that building, right? As a student, you know, who had seen that as a site of trauma, right? Going, no one wants to go to the principal's office, and let alone, you know, he would, you know, that he would be smudging in there one day. So anyway, really great way to start every meeting. We grounded our work in the Ojibwe values as much as possible. Right, these Anishinaabe 7 grandfather teachings are present throughout the Indian Ed Center, where we held our first few meetings, and then of course our liaison, and then of course the gentleman that I showed you with the leading the pipe ceremony there. For example, he led a whole session on teaching these traditional teachings to us so that we could integrate them with our work in the design team. So we've already seen this graphic about the learning lab process, but just another iteration of it. So the same process happening, unfolding in different contexts, right? It has different connections for opening up different paths of expansion and new ideas, right, for solving these different problems of practice, but within these specific buildings, right? So it's obviously a team effort. Really quickly, there's a 4-year overview. I mentioned this is our 5th year of an extension where we're just kind of still promoting, you know, of course, a sustained relationship and support, getting data back and forth, you know, about the school's, you know, continuous improvement plan, and their ways that they've been using the procedures that they've implemented, and the fruit that they're kind of starting to gather and see from all these changes that they've instituted in the building. So they're sharing those with us. But also there are some, you know, some setbacks that happen. I'll get to that at the end here. Just a lot to say, so I'll just try to keep going. Thanks for bearing with me. And so, yeah, for example, this is a quick sheet. You can't see the fine print, but the point is to show you, these are a list of some culturally responsive integration throughout the building, right, in this high school, where it's just tons of, you know, different classrooms and different lessons, different content areas, integrating, you know, Ojibwe language and culture and history on some level with the regular core content. Can't say enough about the different things that came about as ILL unfolded, but all of these are some of the main innovations that happened. A new attendance code was invented by the school to cover this area where they're noticing a lot of the students out unexcused, right, for walleye season, where they're spearing and they're out all night is a custom, you know, for thousands of years up in the Great Lakes, you know, region, and then this being such a bad, you know, treaty war era in the past, it was shunned, right? In the 80s and 90s, it wasn't, you know, seen that, you know, you're not supposed to be, you know, I was missing school because I was spearing out last night, right? So changing that narrative, right? All these bad relationships, and with this code where they're excusing folks from missing for cultural activities like spearing and deer hunting. The Voyager program, you see a photo from there where they're having tribal elders and DNR wardens teach the history and some treaty rights and some overviews of Anishinaabe language and culture in the field, actually, on the reservation, in the beautiful, lakes and forests as teachers, that we have up north. So that's a huge innovative program. But there's so many things to say about all of these. Don't have a ton of time to say them. But just a lot more programming focused on the Native contingent of the school and reaching out to a lot of the other partnerships possible and different agencies that are serving the Native youth at the same time. Yeah, they even have a new class period developed for developing relationships between staff and students, and then to track them throughout their 4 years as a homeroom model. So yeah, just going on, there's just so many wonderful programming changes happening, more tutoring, and then a lot of this too happening with COVID. So a lot of this too was trying to support the students any way they could because the school is closed, literally completely closed, and the reservation boundaries are totally shut down. So just a lot of these kind of open the door for a lot of these new programming programs to begin. So I believe that's pretty much my time. Does anyone else want to add to that? I know that we have Dr. Moine next.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. This was a wonderful presentation. Again, a lot of work. Hopefully, during the discussion, we are going to have more exchange. Thank you so much for presenting. And now, last but not least, Dr. Mawene. Dr. Mawene is going to be presenting a wonderful learning lab she has conducted in a school district. This is a district-wide initiative. Then after that, we are going to have a chance to exchange ideas. Dr. Mawene, stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bal. Hello, everyone. My name is Dian Mawene. I'm currently an assistant professor at the Department of Rehabilitation Psychology and Special Education at UW-Madison. But the work that I'll be presenting briefly with you today is a research that I did with a school district in New Hampshire. Again, I'll keep this brief so we have enough time for discussion. So the Learning Lab in New Hampshire happened organically. I was a new assistant professor in my first semester, and as someone who is new to the land, I initiated to reach out to schools and families just to learn about what is going on. And in one of my meetings with school district leadership, I learned that this particular school district that I was working with, or I have been working with them actually, and we're still continuing the collaboration. They were actually experiencing some tensions. Let me move this. And the tensions, or what Dr. Bal named as the real world problem, is that the district is facing a lot of discrimination and harassment issues at the school level, like everyday sort of interactions. However, the school district, if we look at the state data, the school district reported 0 incidents of bias-based or discrimination or harassment. In the year of 2021, 2022, the state data showed that they have 0 discriminatory incidents. Meanwhile, the school district's Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Justice, or DIJ director here, received direct reports from either students, community members, or parents themselves reporting, and this is only the year of 2 years here since he actually took the job, that there are 15, that these are incidents that reported directly to him, 15 incidents of their racism, based on racism, 5 incidents there are based on transphobia, 2 incidents based on ableism. And if you look into like the year 22-23, the incidents actually increased, right? So the questions was like, why did these incidents are not reported? Were students not reporting them to the school and school district administrators? Do they have the system to report the systems, the incidents, or what happened when an incident reported, right? So for about 3 years, the school district had been trying to do something what Learning Lab does. They were trying to create a protocol for addressing discrimination and harassment. For 3 years, they weren't able to actually come up with the protocol, right? At the same time, also, the state politicians actually released Senate bill to ensure that students are not being, to protect students from being discriminated based on their significant identity. So the school district were grappling legal issues as well as day-to-day life of students. So we partner, myself as and the school district leadership, the former superintendent as well as the director of DIJ, and then we created Learning Lab again for the purpose of addressing discrimination and harassment at the school district level. So we know that there are two things that we were addressing at that time. One is whiteness embedded in the school bureaucracies, like school day-to-day practices, including school disciplinary practices. But second, also, and I think this is speaking to the root or the ideology of Learning Lab itself. So when we started Learning Lab, we know that there is power imbalance in this group, right? Folks are boundary crossings from different roles, responsibilities, different institutions. And so we know that the power imbalance is something that is inevitable in the work of Learning Lab. So we address that strategically. For example, we did that by ensuring that members should be diverse. At the beginning, so we start with small groups, and then when we expand it into who should be, included in this Learning Lab, folks were like, should we have students? Maybe we can just invite students when needed. We can have just like core group of people who understand policies and things like that. But because myself, the director of DIJ, who helped me with who co-facilitated the Learning Lab, we know that students' voices are critical. And then soon the rest of the members knew that, yeah, we need to have the students' voice in this Learning Lab. So we have 16 members. We have students, teachers, parents, districts, and school level administrators. We have 3 high school students. Our meeting lasted for about 90 minutes, and we met bi-weekly throughout 22-23 academic year. And then we had 18 Learning Lab sessions. So this process was not a smooth enterprise at all. It is by far of being smooth. In fact, out of 18 Learning Lab sessions, we spent the first 8 sessions just to question and in that, you remember the cycle of the Learning Lab and the questioning and analyzing process. Within the Learning Lab members itself, there was contradictions and tensions as to whether we need the protocol, and some members believe that everything has been working out great in the school districts. There is no problem, things are great, let's move on. So we faced that tensions, but also members pushed out to that sort of existing whiteness that happened at the school district level and tried to also make appearance in the Learning Lab. So members sort of push back through that, and they push back through several strategies, actually. So one is that in addition to pushing the idea of whiteness and embedded in the school bureaucracy, members also strategically or actually organically within them, because they knew that we need to center the voice of the students, but also there is a perceptions of who is the insider and outsider, who holds the knowledge in the co-design of a policy making, right? Especially, we have parents, we have students, we have community members, vis-a-vis school administrators who believe that they are more familiar with the system, they are more knowledgeable, right? And so you have 3 young students sit on the table with a lot of administrators, teachers, adultism were also present over there. So members challenged that, and so what they did was that they called out this whiteness that existed through adultism and school bureaucracy. So they problematize this type of practices. And when they problematize this type of practices, they also invite students directly, and what I call it as amplifying students' voices, invited students to share their experiences with the school existing system. And also they reconfigured learning lab spaces, because we were trying so hard to actually, especially in the modeling session, wherein we group people based on their roles. So we have like small groups, we have administrators, we have students, we have parents sitting in the same group, and then try to model their desired protocol. And this process also received pushback from folks, Learning Lab members themselves, who feel like we don't need a new system. We can just create something based on what we already had. But the youth themselves, the students themselves, decided that why don't we work with ourselves as students? Why don't we reorganize the Learning Lab small group itself? That way their voice can be heard. And so when that happened, the process then went pretty, I would say, smooth, quote unquote, meaning that we moved pretty fast from that process into the modeling and examining of the Learning Lab. And so this is the front sort of folks here are the students designing or modeling their desired protocols here. But one significant thing that I would like to share before I end this is that the voice of students were really critical in the process, because people started the protocol thinking that the protocol would be used when an incident created by student or incident initiated by students. One of the student members in this Learning Lab questioned the process and then asked that, what if the incident is actually initiated by an adult in the building or at the school district, which has actually happened to these very students? And so the lab members actually added one whole section in the protocol to ensure that what will happen if an incident is actually initiated by adults. And so because we have passed that sort of roadblock of who is the outsider, who is the insider, who is the knowledgeable and who is the not knowledgeable, sort of like after this process, members were very flexible. So they invited the HR to be part of the Learning Lab process, and then crafted the language and making sure that the policy, part of the policy, making sure that adults in the building at the school district were also held accountable. So this protocol currently is being used in all but one schools in this school district. There are still tensions and contradictions that we face from the, again, superintendent as well as school administrators that are trying to protect whiteness in the ways that they have been doing their disciplinary work at school. So I'm just gonna end here so we can have time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moana. This was a wonderful presentation, and I know that this new protocol has been adapted, implemented currently, and we look forward to reading your work. A quick note before we move to the question and discussion session. You can check out Dr. Moana's, Dr. Koh's, Dr. Bravo's, and Linda Ori's work publications. They have been publishing empirical and theoretical work. Please check out their work. Also, we are going to invite them to write essays on the specific learning labs they conducted. Those essays will go with this public on the cultural praxis, along with this recordings of the session. Lastly, I know that these wonderful panelists are organizing an edited book on working on edited book on learning labs. So they are going to share their tools, artifacts, and processes where they ran through their learning labs and specific outcomes. So this is going to be how to guide along with specific results from their learning labs from different contexts. And they are going to add other contexts as well. So please look for that edited book as well. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Now stage is ours. Let's take over and have a dialogue. Please share your comments, questions. Feel free to jump in and take the stage, please.
Hayden, there are comments and questions in the chat that seem like they would be well worth exploring. John, you had I thought a couple of very interesting questions. Maybe bring those up. I don't think everybody had a chance to see the chat.
I apologize because I'm down with COVID at the moment, so I'm fairly
Oh, sorry.
fully all over the place. My thoughts were going in two different directions, actually. One was to do with technologies, thinking about how the rapidly changing, especially the digital technologies, but all the technologies we have, affect a lot of these projects. And the second was to do with generalization, certainly. Linda has actually addressed some of those, and I think it's something worth thinking about, is that, you know, we're not talking about just one, well, you know, all of these. I mean, the wonderful thing about these projects are they are particular to their communities. They really work within the particular cultural and affordances and technological affordances and all those kind of things, which are within their communities, working very closely with real people in real time. But in one of the things that I'm sort of obsessed with at the moment, and you'll forgive me for that, is system-wide change. I'm working with teachers across, you know, Victoria. I'm working to do things in a different way. So the kind of ways that we can and can't, or should and shouldn't, I think actually there's an imperative here, generalize from these, you know, very powerful particular studies and initiatives into more general projects. Because we have a responsibility for this being available to all students, you know, to all Indigenous communities, to all disadvantaged communities, to all disabled students. And so I think that's one of the kind of tensions that sits behind a lot of these projects, is that, and almost everything we do, we tend to do it in the particular, but we don't plan enough for the sustainability of the generalization and the sustainability of what we do. And I think it's an interesting challenge to keep that in our mind as we develop these programs, that it's, you know, it is important for what we're doing and in the communities we're doing, but it should be generalized. I mean, certainly with the School for the Blind, I was working last week with a group of design technology teachers from right across the state which I work in. And their challenge was to design a mini golf course for, because they're design technology teachers and we're thinking about design and design thinking, for vision impaired participants. And so one of the challenges that I gave them was actually, I'm going to get your creation, you know, actually build these things out of physical objects we had around, to actually be tested and to bring in some of my friends, who I have quite a number of blind friends, who are, you know, completely blind. And what occurred to me then is actually that, and it occurred to me as we interacted and we had dinner afterwards, was how technologically, well, how much their ability to function and to do things in a really different way is technologically mediated. So I sing with a blind singer. Her scores are all digital. She reads them off in digital. Yeah, the kind of ways that other friends who do quite complex woodwork is all the machinery has digital components which enable him to read off, to get the measurements, do all sorts of things. So there's kind of, I think, unless we're thinking seriously about our way we interact with new technologies and evolving technologies, then we're selling ourselves short. And we really need to sort of include that in the way that we're thinking. But anyway, enough of my sort of COVID ramblings, and I'll hand it across to everybody else.
Thank you, John. Wonderful points, and I hope you feel better soon. Other comments, insights, discussions, questions? Please join us. I saw someone raise the hand. Yes.
Yeah, by the way, I'm Henry Schonard. I'm in Albuquerque. This Mountain Cloud Zen Center is following me wherever I go.
Thank you, Henry.
It's not something you need to know about me, though. maybe so. Yeah, I was interested. It sounded like Linda was talking about issues that had so much to do with discipline. This is a problem we're having in one of our school districts here in New Mexico, where we have large numbers of Native Americans. It's in the Gallup-McKinley schools, and it's really but in any case, we've had some of that. Now in Dr. Maweni's case, what were the harassments over? Because this is important. One was too much was the kind of disciplining. Now, what was happening in the way of harassments in the school district that you were working with, Dr. Maweni?
So we have like several, I can just give examples. So for example, saying students to go back to your own country because the good thing about your ethnicity is just the food, right? So that's something that, although it might or might not be racially motivated, it has racialized implications, right? We have had students with anti-Semitism drawing some symbols, for example, and that could also repeatedly happen. We have some students who were also calling N-word for Black students and having local incidents with certain, Black boys. And so those are the types of incidents that happen, and they just don't make it into the reporting system. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Henry? No. Thank you. Others? Dr. Lee?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Dr. Bravo. Let's start with Dr. Lee, then I'm going to get back to Dr. Bravo.
Thank you so much all of these insightful presentations. And although I'm not a Dr. Lee yet, if I become Dr. Lee, I really want to implement learning lab methodology to the research. But if I graduate and move to another state, and I'm really curious about how you build connection if you didn't have any connection to the community, and how you became to build your own connections and engage other stakeholders and all the members to agree upon what you are doing in the running lab sessions. This is the question to any of the presenters who had to face similar challenges, and what would be your strategies to build up connections?
So I would like to ask Mr. Adam Budbear, to explain how we have built mutual partnerships with tribal communities through using a culturally responsive partnership tools and ways in which we gain their trust and coalitions. Aaron, would you mind
hello.
briefly explain?
Sure. Can folks hear me? Good. All right. Yeah. So it was really fortunate that Professor Ball was interested in trying to implement one of the learning labs with one of the indigenous communities of the Great Lakes. And although I'm not indigenous to the Great Lakes myself, I am Mandan and Hidatsa, which is like the Central Plains in the United States versus being the Great Lakes. Having worked at the university for a number of years, I was originally hired in the year 2000 to year 2008 to be the Native American Student Support Services Coordinator of campus. So I worked with a bunch of Native American undergraduate, graduate, and professional students during that time period, who then went on to work for their own tribes or went on to other kind of roles in education, government, and health. And so with me being part of the project, we kind of had a baked-in relationship to each of the tribes in some way. And in this particular case, we were able to partner with the tribal education director who was a graduate of UW-Madison during the time that I worked on campus. So we kind of had a little bit of ease in brokering, trusting relationships based on my participation with the project and the long-standing relationships I had with the 12 different Native nations of the state of Wisconsin today. And so I think when we think about building relationships, probably the hardest part of working with Indigenous communities is building that trust, just because of the ways that education, health, law have been used to oppress Indigenous peoples in some way in the not too distant past. And so there's a lot of kind of suspects and suspicion and kind of wonder of why you want to partner with the Native nation if you have no prior connection to them in some way. Most of the successful projects at our university, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, have arisen because we've had a staffer who is a member of one of the tribal nations, or a person like myself who've worked on campus for a long time in partnership with tribal nations. And so I think at least that's a little bit on bridging and building a relationship. Otherwise, we always just say that if Indigenous community doesn't know you, you have to show up in person. You need to talk to people. Indigenous people care most usually about character, and you can't tell character of a person through email. And so having those face-to-face conversations helps Indigenous people assess character. What are your motivations for your study? Why do you want to do that? And so I kind of think about, we were lucky enough in our research that my prior relationships served the Learning Lab project well, but one could do these relationships. It would just take time, and you'd have to spend time participating in that community in person for them to assess one's character, just because natives are worried about data sets being exploited in ways that we're not comfortable with. So I hope does that answer your question, Professor Ko, about kind of how we brokered relationships for the Learning Lab with Indigenous population in the Great Lakes.
Aaron, could you just briefly describe regarding how we utilize traditional tobacco to get their consensus to participate?
Sure. I should have mentioned respecting the worldview of the Great Lakes. The Ojibwe, or the Anishinaabe, as they call themselves, really also have a reverence for medicines, as they call them. So tobacco, sweetgrass, sage, cedar are 4 common medicines that are used for all different purposes with different Indigenous communities. And in the Western Great Lakes, tobacco is used as a kind of means of communicating with the spirit world, is often the role that tobacco plays. It's also used in a lot of political decision-making and kind of binding activities. Tobacco is a utilitarian medicine. It's a really amazing medicine for many different reasons. And so we at the University of Wisconsin-Madison recognize that when we started relationships, it's often giving tobacco is a customary practice. And I describe it to non-Indigenous scholars that it's like the notary public of the Great Lakes. Like, we have this notary public with a stamp, and it says, like, this is really me, and this is really a promise that I'm going to fulfill. It's a contract, So tobacco fulfills that same purpose in many ways. And so we at the University of Wisconsin-Madison started growing our own tobacco as a university because of the rules about purchasing tobacco can be so restrictive. So we were fortunate that the United Nations donated some of their ancestral seed of Nicotiana rustica, which is a indigenous tobacco to the Americas. And we've grown our own tobacco as an institution specifically for relationship making with tribal nations of our state. And so we took some of that tobacco that we grew as a university and gifted it to our Ojibwe partners at our very first meeting. The very first time we met them, we brought up a big haul of tobacco for them to use in the ways they need to see fit. We also did customary gift giving, which is just small gift giving to kind of one would do at the start of a relationship. But that tobacco was really an important kind of first step, saying that we are going to operate with honesty and integrity and follow through. So kind of beginning that relationship in a way that they would begin a relationship shows at least that we're willing to honor their worldview, or at least recognize their worldview in some way at a bare minimum. But obviously, they're going to be full partners in this particular project we were doing. And we just wanted to start the relationship in a good way, is kind of how Indigenous people often phrase it, meaning that, we're trying to bring positivity into the work we're doing. We're trying to bring a lot of capacity, follow through, integrity, all those kind of really important parts of doing something that might impact the citizens of that tribal nation in some way.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful question. Given the time limitations, unfortunately, Dr. Bravo, I'm not going to get to your point, but hopefully we are going to read your essays, your thoughts over there. I'm just going to turn to my partner in crime, Mike Cole. Mike, would you like to say anything to conclude this seminar?
One of the things that impressed me as I was listening to these presentations and that reflects my own experience is how important getting to know somebody is. And it's not something that you do overnight. In the cycle pictures that each of you used, it impressed me that in a couple of cases, at least, I was trying to follow this. It took an entire year. And when we started our project, it took, and it doesn't stop there. That is, you can take the tobacco and you can, as a good warrant that you're going to follow through and you mean to do this over the long term, but you've got to keep coming back. And that the social relations among the people are really critical because you're going to get a lot of flack from the outside. And it's going to be very difficult. They're going to run into a lot of difficulties. So I think that we could use more reflection about the times. A lot of my work, I like John's comment. I'm always focused when I think about these things is when I started, if I'm going to spend a year getting to know these people and there's a real problem, then if we have a successful solution in some sense, if we show we can make a difference, we better plan for sustaining it. Because just to show it and go away, no, that's just perpetuating the problem. So I think in my own thinking and maybe collectively, we have to, and communicating this to others, these various things like taking tobacco or finding out what it is and getting to know what it is that counts for people is a very important of what you do in terms of not beating a 3-year cycle. What we know from our work is, and often the external funding is for 3 years. But it's one thing when you have all external funding and it helps you get started, but are you just going to then let it go away and you have to start up again? That's not right. And so I think I think that's what I would emphasize here at the moment from what I resonated with very strongly from the presentations, all of them actually.
Thank you.
It's slow work.
Thank you very much, Mike. This is wonderful words. And again, thank you so much for joining us. Please tune in for our next following Futures of Education seminar. Next month, we are having this seminar to learn about Utopias